righty then. Welcome, welcome, welcome to Handmaid to Heroine. Thank you, Anne, for coming to join us. You have quite a story. I'm really looking forward to hearing it.
It's a pleasure to be here, Lori. What a story I have. Yes.
So let's see, we did the phone thing. Okay, statement of intention. If you and I could wave a magic wand, this is selenite, it's not really a magic wand, but if we could wave a magic wand right now and get exactly the outcome you want from this time together right now, what would it be? What would it look like?
Wow, I would love to protect people from going through what I went through. And I would love to tell people to own themselves, have their own autonomy, and be themselves. And you are good enough the way you are. That's my intention.
Yay! Yay! I join you in that. Yes.
Okay. All right.
Statement of intent. So I think it's fun to have like an outrageous or a fun kind of safe word. So if I ask a question that's verging into kind of territory, you can go, oh, bananas, or whatever. So what would you like your safe word to be?
Pineapple.
Pineapple. All right, let me write it down. Pineapple. We've had some interesting ones.
Ship, but it might sound wrong.
Well, ship. And we're going to be talking about so much ship anyway. So, all right. So, Anne, how did you get into a soul-sucking authoritarian group?
Oh my gosh. So I was raised in a very nice Christian family. My father was a pastor, and nothing about it was authoritarian in the way he had this community. It was very much just a community of people, and it was wonderful. So you would not think that I would end up there, but there are traces of things that will get you there. And I fell into them. So, it started with growing up. My mom was authoritarian in her disciplinary style. And that was something that she was trained in, right? And so it was the era when everyone would say, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. Or, you're doing this because I said so. Any why is because I said so. Or, just do it. I told you to do it. Just do it. It's very much that way. So I think that started to precondition me or decondition me or whatever to feel like I had a right to defy authority, right? So after I got out of the house and I went to college, I got into ministry. And I found myself in a lot of situations where, because I was a woman, I was not allowed to have the same authority the men had. I didn't get the same pay the men got. I wasn't allowed some of the same privileges the men had. And I remember, yeah, go ahead.
Can I stop you right there for a second?
Yeah.
So the pay thing's pretty clear. What were some privileges that the guys had then that you didn't get because you're a woman?
Well, part of it was like a boys' club. I was on the staff in Florida in this church, and the senior pastor would take all the other pastors out for lunch. And I only got invited once, just the guys, it was the boys' club. And a lot of times they'd have meetings about, I was on the church staff and I was in charge of all the children. So, which was 1,500 children, like 1,500 people in that congregation I was in charge of. I was their pastor, and I was left out of a lot of meetings because I was a woman.
I'm not surprised. Any other examples where the bias was clear?
Besides the pay, I think, there was something that the pastor said in the congregation one day where he said, get all those kids out of here. Just get them out of here, and it was very clear that he didn't want them to really be, it was my job to babysit them, basically.
Oh,
right.
nice.
And yeah. And there was a time when I said, I've got 150 volunteers. I've got everything staffed to the, utmost. And what I want to do now is relook at the curriculum. And he said to me, you don't have to look at the curriculum. Just keep them out of the services. That's all we want. So it was very much an understanding that because I was a woman, I was in charge of babysitting children and making sure they had a safe place. But it was nothing about their spiritual development.
That's telling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah. Then at that time, someone took me to a Bill Gothard seminar. Yes.
I've only heard of Gothard stuff from a young woman who used to babysit for us in Greenville, South Carolina. Her parents were missionaries. She was affiliated with Bob Jones University, which is like hyper Christian nationalist. Just, the girls wear skirts practically to their ankles. They're not allowed to hold hands until they're married. And I heard that they have wild orgies off campus, but that's just me. That's what I heard. So much repression. What else are they going to do? That's the scuttlebutt. But anyway, that's where I heard about Gothard from. So please.
Well, it was the janitor at the church that I was working at. And there was a prayer group that was praying for me at that church. And they were praying for, more of God, more of the Holy Spirit, the baptism of the Holy Spirit. And then when it happened, whatever it was that happened, the janitor said, you need to go to a Bill Gothard seminar and get your priorities straight. And of course, Bill Gothard, he was all about an umbrella of authority, that God has these leaders and they're an umbrella and you're under the protection of that umbrella. And I had never heard any of that stuff because my father was like, women should be in church office. My mom was an elder in her church. There was nothing like this, And so I thought, well, I should listen to it. And I listened to it and took my notes diligently. But I think that, and then you're allowed to go back for free. You go the one time and you pay, the janitor paid for me, I think it was like $30. Okay. And then you get a book and then you get the book hardcovered. So it's a very special book. It goes right next to your Bible and you have all your notes in there. And then you can go back for free and just keep getting that training. So very much into headship and complementarianism and, and it's not that I got into it, but yeah.
For those who might not be familiar, because I'm not sure, I think I know, but I'm not sure I understand what complementarianism is. Is that women are second bananas-ism or what is that?
It's that, well, women and men are equal, but they have different jobs. And so men are the provider and the head, as Christ is the head of the church. Women, are more subservient. Their job is, again, the children.
Yeah. Okay.
And that God actually created us. So, a Mr. Mom, they're not going to go for that idea.
So a widow, she just has to stay broke and not feed her kids because she doesn't have a head anymore?
Well, then in the widow's case, God steps in as the head and becomes a special husband to the wife. Yes.
Okay, we'll move on from that.
Yeah, that's how it goes.
Okay, so alrighty then. So how did you did the Gothard thing. How did that lead you to the place some have affectionately called Screams Ministries?
Well, what happened was my husband and I were in ministry. He was a pastor, and we were in a very volatile situation, a church that was dying, struggling. They had run out 7 pastors before us. And for some reason, we thought we had something special to offer them, that we would be different. It's
But y'all
young
are awesome.
idealism. Right. Well, thank you. Yes,
Well,
it's
both of
young
you are.
idealism.
Yeah.
Thank you. But we didn't have the something something that was going to save us. So what I did to save our butt was now my kids were little, 2 and 4 years old. I got down on my hands and knees and prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed all day long. I prayed and I worshiped. I started prayer groups in the church, and I did everything I could to grow up a group of prayer warriors that would save this church. That was my thing. And the people that were at war with us would say things like, no amount of prayer is going to save this church. You'll be walking over my dead body before I leave this church. And as it stood, once all the pastors were run out and most of the people died, a
Hmm.
small group of the people that were very mean
Hmm.
walked off with millions of dollars from selling the property because it was outside of New York City. Yeah. So, anyway, to put it in perspective, I had just come out of that situation where we got beat down,
Hmm.
destroyed, and
Hmm.
I started taking some of John Paul's classes. Hearing God 101 was the first class. And so picture this woman with two little kids, her husband's going under, we're going to lose our home, we're going to lose our job, we're going to lose our livelihood, everything. And I'm like, I got to hear from God.
Right.
So I put a van load of people from my church and we drove up to that class in New Jersey once a month, on a Sunday night. And um, that is how I got involved with streams, because after taking Hearing God 101, I had to take the second class, Understanding Dreams and Visions. Then I need to take the third class. By that time, every time you had this group of people that you kind of bonded with, right?
Sure.
And then you'd be prayed for at the end of the classes by John Paul himself, and he'd prophesy over you. And I found I was having a lot of dreams. At that time, they were given a property in New Hampshire, and I was having dreams about living in New Hampshire and loving New Hampshire and just feeling very called. And I started passing those dreams on to John Paul in an email, kind of prophetic dreams he told me, and pretty soon he offered me a job. And so I went up there to New Hampshire to work. That's how I got there. And I was looking to redeem all the mess that we had in New Jersey. So I was in this bad way, and John Paul always talked about the spotted and speckled, and that the people that were in a bad way would find him and we would be this strong community in God. And that kind of language really appealed to me at that point in my life.
Well, yeah, you've just been beaten down by a bunch of thugs, it sounds like, and people that were after the real estate value. Tale as old as time. Follow the
Absolutely.
money.
That's
Follow the
right.
money.
That's mm-hmm,
Tale as old as
mm-hmm.
time. And it's ironic that money later became such an interesting thing, and the money at streams and how that all ended up is very interesting as well.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting ahead. So when you arrived, um,
Yeah.
what were some of the things that you loved? Because there's always, if not a honeymoon phase, at least
Mm-hmm.
things that were appealing. I mean, even in the worst hellhole, usually there are people that you at least loved, and there were good
Yeah.
things going on enough to overlook the red flags to a point.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's important
Yeah.
for people to hear as well, because it's like it's not all bad. It's not all
Mm-hmm.
horrendous.
No.
Um, just yeah, I'm sure a lot of battered women share. Well, but if only you knew Fred. It's like whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So what were some of the positives?
Well, first of all, it was in the mountains and it was beautiful. It was a beautiful setting. The mountains in New England are gorgeous in the fall, and property was inexpensive. So we were able to buy a beautiful, cute house in the mountains by a lake. That was very appealing. The ministry itself, there were some really cool people that were drawn there. They were just fun and funny and cool. And I liked them. You know, they were like ready-made friends and family. And so that was enjoyable. The other thing was I had a job. I hadn't been working. We needed money. My husband had been working, but it was nice for me to be able to now work and get an income too. And the kids were young, but they could go to school. And I had a friend there that was watching the kids when they weren't in school. So it just seemed like the perfect thing. And the job, I mean, the job was all about traveling and going to conferences. So instead of paying to go to the conferences, now I was one of those people in the front of the conferences, right? Selling
Getting
the
paid.
books and getting paid and leading things. And you know, and I won't lie, it was a real buzz to walk through an airport with John Paul and have people recognize him. You know, that was like, whoa, you know. So yeah, it was a head trip.
Cool. I mean,
Mhm.
you know, that's good.
Yeah,
It's good to be recognized and rewarded for what you
yeah.
enjoy. That's, what you put so much of your heart and soul into it. That's the way it should be. We should
Mhm.
be rewarded for
Yeah.
amazing but true.
Yeah, no, it's
So,
true.
yeah. So as you went along there, what were some of the red flag experiences that you had that are like, wait a minute?
Yeah.
And we did talk about the moose story
Yeah. Yes, we
that
did.
that I've never shared.
Okay. Well, that was the end of the red flags. My first red flag was that they put me in a closet to work. Um, everyone else had offices, but I had a closet, and they set up all these computers in the closet and they made me go through the database. So I had to go, they had like 6 databases and they wanted me to rectify them all into one. It was
Oh
the
my
worst
God.
job on earth. But I just thought, well, they start you low and then you prove yourself. Now, but you have to understand, I have a degree in ministry. And here I am being in an office messing on databases, which I had no ability really to do anyway. That's
Mm.
not my gift. And then someone came in the office that was looking for a place to live. And I told them about my realtor. And John Paul was in the office and he said, "Oh no, everybody who goes here uses Vicky." And I thought, well, who would say that, right? I thought he was teasing. So I said, well, Joe gives really good gifts. And he goes, well, Vicky gives good gifts too. And I said, well, Joe, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, well, Vicky, blah, blah, blah. And then he goes, everyone uses Vicky. And he got really mad. And he didn't talk to me for 2 months. Mm-hmm. And let me tell you, that was awkward because there were only about 12 of us there at the
So
time.
even
Mm-hmm.
in group settings, you were shunned.
He shunned me. He shunned me. Yep. And then one time we had these things called fireside chats that started up. And this was at the very beginning. He started talking about how God tells him to shun people sometimes because they have to be put into their place and learn their lesson. And I knew he was talking about me. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting way to spiritualize being a dick. But
Yeah. Yeah. So, that
wow.
started me on this, wow, what's going on? And then they took me out of the closet. We moved into a new building and then they made Greg my boss. And I was just not a secretary kind of person, an
No,
administrative
no.
person. That again I'm not detail oriented, but he was very harsh with me. He was just like, why did you do that wrong? Blah, 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 blah. So that was another red flag.
Sorry.
You know,
Sorry. That's one of my top of the list people when it got through.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So he was
Yeah.
harsh on you?
So Greg was very hard on me and I felt put down and discouraged. And at that point, I would have wanted to walk because he was just awful, awful, awful to me. But then finally, Mitch took me under his wings and put me in the events category. So then I was able to breathe.
So Greg, the second banana guy,
Yeah.
he what are some examples of some experiences you had that show that aspect of him?
It was just that he yelled at me when I misspelled something or missed a detail. It was almost like he was out to get me and prove that I was inept and inadequate. He was very condescending. So if I
Okay.
missed an A in a word, what is this? You gave me, it's just terrible. Just the way he spoke to me was harsh and authoritarian and cruel and abusive. Yeah.
Not surprised by any of this, but just
No.
yeah, but that's a good example of I do remember the condescension very
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Just a quick side note, I was at an event one time, was sitting near I happened to be seated next to one of his kids, and he had the same sort of demeanor, and he was like, well, it's really simple. You just have to know what people are thinking. I said, so what am I thinking? Like, and he just kind of crumbles. It's like, quit being such a pretentious little weasel and just get over yourself. Come on. So what's another red flag? And obviously, well, I don't want to tell your story, but what's another red flag that led up to the big moose affair?
Okay. There's one more that I want to tell you at the beginning, because there was a time when Greg sat us in the office and said to us, you are part of the A team. Everybody's going to try to use you to get to John Paul because he's a hero. When you are working on the staff of John Paul, you will be given special gifts and abilities of prophetic abilities and wonderful abilities. But make no mistake, they are not yours. They are John Paul's. And the only reason you're experiencing them is because they're falling down under the umbrella of John Paul onto you. And if you have ever emailed John Paul in the past, that time will end now. You are not allowed to contact him. You are not allowed to email him. You are not allowed to have any contact with him unless it goes through me first.
Imagine that.
Yes.
Imagine that. Control. Now, just for those of you listening, Greg he and his wife used to be very prominent Scientologists. So it's very interesting to note certain behaviors being carried over into what created, I think, a very a unique sort of cult. But that's me.
Yes.
A unique sort of culty blend.
Yeah. So all that's going on, right? And in the meantime, it's growing and growing and growing, and people are starting to come. And I was leading worship for a while. There was no one else there. And then they hired a new pastor, and he liked to lead worship, so we did it together. And then they hired a worship leader. So, little by little, I'd just be, put in my place. We were Tetris people, and he needed to have a high profile worship leader. He needed to have a high profile pastor. John Paul needed everybody high profile to give his ministry validity. So little by little, people are spilling in. Some of us are going into different jobs. It's just this big fruit basket upset. And John Paul was traveling all the time. And this was very interesting because the guy who became the pastor was not someone who was gonna, he was someone who was very aware of authoritarianism and was not gonna buy it, right? So one night, John Paul took the whole staff into the meeting room. And by then, I bet you there's 30 of us at least. And we're all in the meeting room. And he sits down and he says, God has revealed to me. Now that's how he started everything, that meant now we need to listen because God speaks to him.
And nobody else.
So God has revealed to me that there is trouble in the camp, and that's why I'm getting sick all the time. Now, let's not talk about the fact that he was on the road at least 5 out of 7 days a week, and not on the road, I mean on a plane, sitting by people, and preaching and doing his thing, and pushing his books. And of course he was sick. He didn't even get a good night's sleep, but it was because there was dissension in the camp. And all of these people, they're like, we're so sorry. Oh, and now these are people who just got there like 3 weeks earlier. I mean, there was no dissension in any of them. I knew all these people. I trained all these people, and they're all crying and they're like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, John Paul. And they're crying and they're laying at his feet. And the pastor talked to him the next day and says, what you're doing is wrong. You are taking all of the glory from God into you. This is spiritual abuse, what you're doing to these people. You know good and well that you're not sick because there's dissension in the camp. And he called him on it. And so he got fired.
Mm-hmm.
And then my boss got fired, and his wife got fired, and 2 more people in my group said, hey, we're quitting, we're not going to put up with this anymore. And there I was the lone person left in that
Mm-hmm.
in that department, the lone
In that
person
first
in the
wave.
events. Right. And at that point, because they had to move everybody around, they decided to make Doug, the shipping guy, my new boss of the events. So that was a little bit mixed up because Doug was a very nice guy, but didn't know what he was doing, right?
Right.
He just, so
But he's a guy.
But he's a guy. Yes, exactly. Besides, they didn't like me because I pulled something on John Paul with the realtor, right? So now there's a vacancy.
You and your free will.
Me and my free will.
Ridiculous.
Well, they were
Ridiculous.
very clear that I had a problem with authority. They were very clear on that, and they were watching me for the Jezebel spirit, and I was trying so hard to keep my head down, and
Can I, for those who might have a different interpretation, because some of us, typically when we hear Jezebel, the connotation is someone who, I don't know, wears short skirts and red stockings or something ridiculous, like, is loose with their attentions, I mean, this is obviously pretty dated terminology. So this whole Jezebel thing, can you fill us in on that a little bit?
Yeah, John Paul wrote a book on the Jezebel spirit. And it was really about women who were trying to usurp a man's authority, women who were too outspoken, women who had opinions of their own and dared to disagree with the man, And again, it was all about that headship, that umbrella of headship, and women had to be in their place. So any woman who stepped out of line in any way was right away called a Jezebel.
And out of line meaning not kissing up, not basically having a backbone, because it's not like it was a subversive, like in corporate America.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not that I'm a huge fan of corporate America, but having some initiative, having some backbone, those aren't considered bad things typically.
Right.
But in this setting, especially being a woman and having any sort of backbone, any initiative, any thoughts of your own. So it's not like directly going against whoever's in authority there. It's basically just not being a completely pliable lemming. That was my understanding.
Right.
Okay.
Having an opinion, having an opinion.
Yes.
Even having a look, whatever. Yeah. So they were watching me. So then notice. What happened? Yes, okay. I'm on notice. I'm always on notice. What happened was when everyone got fired and they put the shipping guy in front of me, and then they had a vacancy for a pastor, they thought, oh, well, Tom's a pastor. Maybe we should talk to Tom. So they're like, let's get Tom and Ann and let's take them out to lunch. So after church one Sunday, they took us all out to I forgot the name of it. There was a Mount Kearsarge was overlooking it. And anyway, they took us out for lunch and they started to talk to Tom about the potential of being the pastor. And Tom was very not interested because he watched the other pastor get thrown away. He watched everything that was going on. He thought they just want someone who's meek and subservient, and I am not going to get myself in this situation, because we had just come out of that awful church where we ended up with no job and no house and anything. He had a full-time job that he was working at, and he's like, I'm not giving that up. I don't mind coming out here so you can have a job, but I'm not giving up my job. We're going to be stable here. So he did not act too excited about it, right? So the next day, John Paul meets me in the kitchen area of the office, and he says to me, I have a word from the Lord for you. And I'm still drinking the Kool-Aid. I still think, by some odd reason, he still hears from God. So I said, well, what is it? And he says to me, your husband is at least a year out from being able to do ministry. He's still got hurts and pains, and I've noticed them when I talk to him. So yeah, blah, blah, blah. And he said, furthermore, you are fat. You have been gaining weight, and you are fat because your husband doesn't know how to take authority over you. He said that. Yes. I know. There's silence on the air. Lori's about this wide open. Yes. You hear this story? I'm sure you forgot. I'm sure I told you this. Yeah.
I didn't. I think I'd forgotten, and I certainly didn't. Like, he called you.
He called me fat. And then he said, yes. And then it even gets worse. He says, and your children, your two darling little daughters that are the sweetest little things, are damned.
I do remember that.
Yes.
Because Tom wouldn't roll over and play a fool. David he is a great guy. Yeah. But after witnessing what happened with David, Tom's not a fool. He's like, no thanks. I'm not, not gonna do that.
No, that absolutely.
Yep. Man.
Yep. Yeah.
Wow. So God told him all this.
God revealed this to him.
God revealed to him that you'd gained a little weight. That takes wow.
Oh, well, no, he revealed to him the reason I've been gaining weight was because Tom didn't know how to take authority over me. Again, the
stress eating.
Right.
So he wasn't taking authority over you, whatever that means.
Right. Well, I was to find out what that meant. So I cried for a while, and then Greg comes to me and says, I need to have a meeting with you this afternoon at 4:00 in the boardroom, which is half window, right? So everyone can see, right? In the boardroom, you and me and Doug, your boss, we're going to have a meeting. And I'm like, okay. So I get in there, 3 of us in there. He says, I understand John Paul gave you a word from the Lord today. Well, I start crying because he called me fat and he damned my children. I'm crying.
It's horrible.
And then it's horrible. And I said something like, oh, I must be PMSing, sorry. And he goes, no, it's not that. Greg says, it's because when you get a word from the Lord, it touches your emotions. That is why you're crying, because it's true and you know it. This is what he said to me. It's true and you know it. And I'm like, whoa.
How insidious, how hideous.
I know. Very next line is, well, we've determined that you have trouble with authority. And I looked at him and I said, on what grounds? And he said, well, when you talked to John Paul about the realtor, You challenged him. That was my trouble with authority. Second trouble with authority was I was standing in the hallway right outside of Barbie's office and talking to Doug, who was at that point the shipping guy, right? And Barbie came out and got into the middle of the conversation. And I said to Doug, why don't we move down the hall so we don't bother Barbie? That's what I said. That was evidence that I was usurping authority because I told Doug, my boss, that we should move down the hall. And then I thought, well, I'm not even going to go into the whole moving down the hall is just considerate. Me suggesting that as a woman is whatever, thoughtful instead of an authority problem. But he says to me, I said to him, because I thought I'm going to play your stupid game, you dummy. And
Right.
and I said, he wasn't my boss. He was working in the shipping department. Oh, well, okay, that's not one, but we know you have a problem with authority. So he said, we're going to teach you how to be a proper wife and Tom how to be a proper husband. And
Oh,
Patty and I
no.
are going to coach you.
Yes. He's going to teach you against your will.
Yeah.
Without your consent.
Yeah.
How to be a proper wife and give your husband tips.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So he said, since you have a problem with authority, now, mind you, I was running the events at that point, really running the events. Pretty much everyone was on their way out. And when you ran an event, you set it up and you went to the event and you always had to troubleshoot when you went to the event because there'd be things that fell through the cracks, right?
Always.
He says to me, I will let you continue to coordinate the events, but you will not be allowed to travel and go to them anymore. I was now on suspension. And I knew that they were just setting me up to fire me because you're going to get it wrong and your head's going to be on a platter, right? Someone's going to miss something and your head's going to be on a platter. Some door's not locked or something,
it's life.
Something's missing, whatever, it's life.
Right.
So I am just furious at this point, and I start crying and sobbing when I got out of there. And I called Tom and I just sobbed. And he said, what did they say to you? And I recounted my day and I drove home just sobbing. And I was so upset. And then I shared it with a few people in streams who went to Patty and Greg and told them about our conversation. Yeah. And I've forgiven them, but don't.
It's a hell of a thing to do. Why would someone squeal on you like that?
Because the whole situation there was that you had to be a team player, and to be a team player, you had to drink the Kool-Aid. You had to buy into everything they did. And if you were seen with someone who was on the wrong side of their law, you were in trouble. So when David moved, Tom and I showed up to help them move, and we were in trouble. People saw us and said, what are you doing here? We're like, we're helping them move. We're helping them pack their stuff, Yeah. But you had to throw people under the bus so that you could stay. So even those people, I'm not mad at them. It was as soon as they fire people, they have to be thrown under the bus. They have to be discredited and they have to be shunned. Yeah.
That happened with me when I left. It was like, it's just understood. People weren't necessarily unkind, but it's like they were afraid to talk to me or be seen around or to be seen being nice to me because it was like they didn't want everything coming down on them.
Right.
Yeah. And it's like these people you spent so much time with and felt like you had things in common with in like one decision, and all of a sudden this isn't just like with companies. People say, the people you work with, they're not your family.
Right.
They're the people you work with. And it's the same thing with the people you go to church with. They're not your family.
Right.
You know, being
Right.
family's hard enough sometimes.
Yeah. No, true. Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
it's like it's not an occulty
Mm,
organization. I'm sure they're
mm,
lovely and fine and wonderful groups where people do function that way, and yay, more power to
yeah.
them.
Yeah.
But in culty ones, it's very toxic, wouldn't you say?
Very toxic. Very
Yeah.
toxic. Well, people didn't know what to
So
do with me. Yeah.
no,
They didn't
they
know.
so the day he dropped the F bomb, you know, fat is a horrible thing to call somebody.
Yeah.
It really is.
I know.
Um, you know, and I remember somebody else who I'd like to keep anonymous, but who did an enormous amount of writing and editing and publicity for him, um,
Hmm.
who um, felt like she had weight issues,
Yeah.
and he used to go after her all the time. She told me
Hmm.
this herself. He used
Yeah.
to go after her relentlessly about that.
I believe it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so it's like, alrighty
Yeah.
then.
Yeah.
This woman who put him on the map, who's
Right.
writing and editing and publicity, you know, it's like without her,
Right.
you know, he would have
Right.
been the basically used car salesman he'd been all along. But anyway, moving on.
But it was about image. It was about image. Yeah.
Totally. And she was
Yeah.
brilliant. She was
Yeah. She
absolutely
was.
brilliant with it. I mean, she's just first class, just a first
Hmm.
class human being, you know.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So
So,
he left the ultimate hard way.
yeah. Yeah. And so then basically what happened was Tom said, "Well, I still want to stick around the church and see what's going to happen because now he's curious. I wonder what will happen." And I'm like, "I just want to be done, and I want to
Right.
never go back."
Right.
But Tom wanted to stick around the church, so I stayed on the worship team and was there a few weeks. John Paul actually called me into his office a few weeks after I quit. So I thought about it 2 weeks and then I quit.
I've
And then
never.
John Paul called me in, gave me a hug, and he said, "You know, this is the problem." He goes, "You are very charismatic." He goes, "When you walk into a room, you can make it shine or you could make it dark." He was threatened by me,
Yeah.
that I was going to say something and, turn people against him. But I was still so loyal at that point, and not loyal in thinking he was great, but loyal in it was a ministry and I wasn't going to talk about people, or slam him, right? So one night, you and I and the worship leader and another musician were all in the van on our way back from a conference. And it was very hard for me to be at that conference because those are the things I ran, and I saw all kinds of things go wrong, and I even had to call and have the hotel lock up the room. And I thought, I'm doing the other people's jobs that I should have been doing. I mean, it
Right.
just, ugh. Anyway, that night we were driving home and we hit a moose. A moose. So in the middle of New Hampshire on that highway,
No
you're
lights.
talking to me. You're sitting in the back seat. I'm in the front passenger seat.
Hmm.
Trevor's driving, and I'm looking out as you're talking, and I'm thinking, there's a horse and buggy over there. And bam! The mirror, fortunately, just the mirror hit the nose of the moose as he was crossing the street, knocked the mirror into the driver's side window, crashed the window, and the shards of glass went all over Trevor and I. And we were about 3 miles away from the office. So he just kind of drove back to the office. And the next day, John Paul goes to the conference and says, "God came to me yesterday and asked me if it was okay if he took some of my staff home to be with him." In other words, dead. Was it okay? John Paul,
Can
me,
I
hi, it's
please,
God.
pretty please, will you do me a favor, John Paul? You know, because I answer to you. Yeah, that's the implication.
Absolutely. "I, God, am asking you, John Paul, if it's okay if I wipe out these 4 people in this van tomorrow." And
Pretty please.
pretty please. And John Paul says, "Oh God, I'd rather you not, please spare their lives. So then he hears about the accident and he has to tell the whole conference that God had come to him asking him for permission, but John Paul had prayed and God spared their lives. Now, we're sitting here today because John Paul prayed and spared our lives.
Don't even say that.
I mad. Yeah, I was mad. And I called Trevor and I said, I'm out. That's it. I am out. And that was it. I was out.
I remember being absolutely stunned. And I was like, I mean, obviously I knew he was full of it, but I was just absolutely stunned that he would use that to showboat his imaginary connection and, dare I say, superiority over, by his own logic, the supreme deity for the entire universe for all time, creator of heaven and earth, answers to his used cars salesman self. No offense to people who sell used cars, but I mean, come on.
And does he ever write over our own lives? I mean, doesn't my husband and my children, shouldn't they have more to say about whether or not I live than him? Like, what is this?
Tisk. This is the completely amazing ministry that's going to change everything and very special by its own definition. Fabulous things were going to happen, blah, 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 blah. I mean, and I hate to say it, but actually, I don't hate to say it. A woman I interviewed yesterday for another episode was at a new age yoga sex cult that she was brought up into. And you know what? They believed the same thing, that they had a very special, we're all very lucky, very important, and how lucky we are to get to share this incredible thing that's going to help everybody, which is the same thing that a woman who had left a particular kind of Mormonism, who I interviewed earlier yesterday, had to say. We're very special, we're incredibly wonderful, we're so lucky, this incredible place and time, and just us have this wonderful thing that nobody else has, and how lucky are we, and we get to share it. It's the same fucking story. It's like everywhere. It's like
it is
just, so we have three completely different organizations, the same shtick. It's like it's a tale as old as time now. It's like, so whenever anybody says we have the wonderful thing and no one else and la 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 la, it's just so, I mean, it's like
hindsight is the best teacher.
I mean to tell you, but when you're young and you're idealistic, and because a lot of people who are highly idealistic get charged into these situations. I mean, why am I doing this podcast? Because I do have some idealism left in there, because I hope if someone hears this, it might help them get out faster. And it might help them to, and like with your intention, it's like if they can just reclaim their own autonomy faster, I think the world will be a better place. But the big difference is that we don't think we have the only way to do that, blah, blah, blah. It's just...
Right.
There are infinite pathways. So the moose thing, was your tipping point.
That was it. I was gone. And then, wow, I lost everybody. That was it.
Yeah.
But fortunately, I hadn't made that place my whole life. I had lived in a different community, in a different town. I had friends. So it didn't bust me down. Now, it was interesting after that to try to visit churches, because everybody had heard about him and thought he was so great. And so why would I leave the ministry? There must be something wrong with me, right? So there was a lot of, with us, because why would we leave? I mean, I even had really good friends that knew me for years before that say, oh, well, he's a high and mighty prophet of God, so you must have done something wrong. I mean,
like, man, the Kool-Aid runs strong.
It runs really strong down a big river, over the river, through the woods, over the mountains, everywhere.
Kool-Aid River, wider than a mile. So for you, So it was just a series of unfortunate events and shocks, and then you reached your tipping point. Is that's what I'm
Yes.
hearing? Okay.
I reached my tipping point and I left. Yeah, that was
It's
it.
in the woman, the ex-Mormon woman I interviewed yesterday. She said they have a saying in ex-Mormon communities: the shelf broke. The shelf where they put all of their misgivings and questions and this and that, like the shelf broke. And I think it has merit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that shelf came crashing down. Done.
Yeah. Well, it's horrible. So for you have come such a long way. You have been extraordinarily successful in a number of ventures, creative endeavors since then. And so, what are some healing, restorative resources, things that you've found that have helped you to be your own heroine, full of life affirming your own purpose? Thank you very much.
Yeah. It's been a process. I started out, now this was back when we had to plug our computer into the phone. Remember that? Remember these days? Yes. So I started out by finding information on cults on the web, which at that point there weren't that many, but I found a website and every single thing I copied. I transferred it over to my computer and copied it on paper and read it. And studied cults. And I realized that I was in an authoritarian system. And so then I had to put that all together, what would get me into that system, what was making me want to do that. And I did a lot of deconstructing at that point, just reading and figuring things out. Therapy, I'm sure I went back to therapy. I must at some time.
Yeah.
And, somewhere in this, I went back into therapy, and then I got into photography. And wouldn't you know, an older man, picked me up as his partner. But soon I was finding that I was almost in the same situation that I was at Streams, that I was doing the work and he was getting the glory. So I would do that. Yes. And I thought, oh, no, here we go again.
Right.
So I cut it. I just cut it off. And I thought, oh, I've been there, done that. And I thought, there is nobody that needs to give me a voice or fulfill my mission, or I can use my own voice and my own talent. And I'm done using my talent behind these men to get them their glory. They walk off with everything, So
I do know.
So I started my own thing, I started my own YouTube channel, and it's mine. I share it with other people. I have other people's guests, but it's mine, and I decide where it goes and what it looks like. And I've done podcasts. I just, there's so many opportunities these days to have a voice, to share your gifts, to put it out there.
There absolutely are. It's incredible age. Okay. All that John Paul talk got to you, didn't it? Okay.
No, sorry.
That's okay. Did it go down the wrong way?
Post-nasal drip went down my throat.
Okay. Well, it's the season, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, I've been having some allergies. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's what it was. So anyway, I'm going to blow my nose and I'll be right back. Okay. That way it won't happen again. sister gets to preaching and it's all over.
Well, you make it, of course I'm going to edit this out, but you're making great points. Like it really is a revolutionary, we live in a revolutionary moment. I totally am just still, even still enthralled with how revolutionary social media is, blogging, social media. And it's like suddenly we don't have to rely on the old way of doing things, the patriarchy. We don't have to rely on that to get our voices heard. And it's fabulous. And there's never been a better time to get out of a cult either.
There hasn't, and that's the thing. We were raised in that era where our mothers were still under some of that patriarchy rule, and they were starting to get out. That was the era of women's lib. That was the era where women were finally saying, wait a minute here. So we were children during that era. So no matter how successfully our parents did it, there is still a whole lot of men holding on to their authority.
Absolutely.
And if you're going to find them, you're going to find them in a lot of churches and a lot of culty organizations. And they're there. They're there and they're still there. I mean, I had a friend in college. Yeah, I had a friend in college whose husband wouldn't let her eat ice cream. Yeah, he would decide what went in her mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she let him?
Yes, she let him. She was sweet, and she thought, well, he's my head. He's my husband.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
And then I spent the night at their house. I was in the spare room, and he bombed in at 7 a.m. and said, get up, on the head of the house. Everyone gets up now. That was the last time I was ever there.
Okay. That leads me to jump to a number of conclusions that I can't really say. This not being what is it, NFSW or whatever, like due to the non-explicit nature of this, but really, is he that challenged, that much of an inferiority complex that he's got a wow,
right,
that's, fun times for them.
I know.
But can I ask you 2 more questions,
please?
Okay. Actually, no, I'm going to skip over talking about sex and money because, we've had a lot of good stories. By the way, just a quick, a quick story. Did I ever tell you about when I first got there, which was after the honeymoon phase, as it were? Like I landed, as soon as I got there, all hell had broken loose and someone had died and everything was just crazy. And it was just kind of like, oh my God. Very much just open-eyed, just like, what? Shock. There's a word for it, shock.
Deer in the headlights.
Very much. It's like, okay, what's going on? What just happened here? Why am I here? And I just moved cross country, so shit. But anyway, cards and letters would come in from lots of individuals because they had a big mailing list, and people would send prayer requests, solicited prayer requests, handwritten many times, just very heartfelt, sincere prayer requests. And they would include cash or checks supporting the ministry, and because it was their hope that these prayer requests would get prayed over and that they felt like they were doing something. And it's my understanding that it's implicit that when people send in a prayer request with money, that somehow it just like throws more heat behind that ball if they throw it, so to speak. Like it gives it more gravitas is the teaching. And you pull in more weight with the Almighty if you give him back some of what's his already. Or I'm not exactly clear on the logic anymore because of I'm so far out of that stuff. But they would take the cards and letters every day and pull out the checks and the cash and just throw them in the trash can in the conference room. that same conference room that you were, God revealed that your husband's not a kiss up or whatever it was, but it's just so horrible. But that and so much more. But and nobody minded. Nobody said anything about it. Nobody seemed to think that was any kind of a character issue or like any kind of legitimacy there. And I remember when somebody had started praying over those in the mornings, it was like, you can come, but you better not be on the clock while you're doing it. And so does any of that surprise you?
Not at all. I know that when I was getting ready to leave, they were starting to cut people's, hold back what they were paying people because they decided that they didn't have enough money. And so they were cutting people's paychecks, but the accountant was still writing out the $700 for the one car and the $800 for the other car, and he was writing out checks for all these people that were living off the ministry, living in the ministry's house, everything. And then the people that were making $10 an hour now had to make like $9 an hour because they couldn't cover their bills. So, yeah.
I'd forgotten about him and his adorable wife.
Yeah.
And so the cards and letters, the checks, they basically, the two people who were at the top of the organization, is that whose cars and housing and everything else that was getting covered?
Oh, spouses. And yes, the two people at the top of the organization and their spouses. Yeah.
And their spouses.
Yeah.
Are just, okay. So full on grift, just full on, unapologetic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And, it even reminds me of this other person I worked with that would take everybody's cards. So all their business cards and yes. And as soon as they walked away, he'd throw all the business cards into the garbage. I'm not going to contact them. I mean, so this isn't just that. This is across the board that people do this. Across the board. I'd also like to say, because you're part of this story, that it was a year and a half later when they came after you, suddenly I get a phone call from you. And you're the only person that I got a phone call from after that, and you said, I am so sorry. I did not know what was going on when it all came down with you. I got sucked in. I'm so sorry. I want you to know what they did after you left. And you explained to me that John Paul himself went from person to person in the office to slam me, to say my marriage was bad. We don't have a good sex life. Like what? Like the things that he was saying to slam me, to keep them from anyone from contacting me again. Very interesting. And
that's one way to put it.
But I think that, Lori, that helped. I was deconstructing all that time, but I think that broke the spell completely when you called me and told me that. So thank you, because I needed to hear what went on there. I needed to know, like once in a while you say to yourself, am I just crazy? Did I just make this up? So to go back there and hear that, and then my rage was, up, and I wrote him a letter and just said, how dare you do this to me? And I think that was also part of my recovery, because I had the audacity to confront this mighty man of God, and tell him what, I had that. That was so freeing. And yes, I was a little afraid, even at that moment, that I would be struck by lightning. But you know what? I'm here today and he's not. So
we both wrote letters that day. And
yes,
it was
we
fabulous.
did.
Absolutely fabulous. Oh my God. Thank you so much. Is there anything you want to share with people about what you're doing or what you're not doing online, or do you want to just end it there?
I I mean, if you guys want to watch me on YouTube, I have a decorating channel. Total flop,
Gorgeous.
and it's mine. There's no male patriarchy in my decorating channel. It is just fun. So, Ann Clay, the Primitive Home on YouTube. It's just, we just have fun. I bought a 250-year-old homestead in New England and have been redoing it and decorating and just having a blast with it. And it's so much fun, it's so much fun. And I don't answer to anybody.
I love it. And I love seeing y'all behind the bar too. Like you do all kinds of fun things. So, yeah.
Fun? Yeah.
So awesome. So. Thank you very, very much, Ann.
Thank you, Lori. It was a pleasure.